Behind the bright spotlights and glamorous magazine covers of the 1960s to the 1990s, a dark reality was hidden. Some of the most beloved British stars were actually ruthless mothers behind closed doors. Their jealousy, obsession with control, and hidden rivalry shattered the marriages and lives of their own daughters. Have you ever wondered what it costs to be born in the shadow of a legend? Subscribe to the channel right now and leave a comment below about which of these toxic relationships shocks you the most. Let us dive into these 10 heartbreaking stories. Margaret Lockwood. The silver screen idol of her generation possessed a magnetism that captivated millions. Yet behind the heavy velvet curtains of her private life, she was a woman of suffocating intensity. Margaret Lockwood was accustomed to total adoration and absolute obedience, viewing her daughter Julia not as an independent soul, but as an extension of her own monumental legacy. From the very beginning, every footstep the young girl took was carefully choreographed by a mother terrified of losing absolute control over her most prized creation. The famous star demanded perfection, turning their home into an extension of the film set. Instead of a normal childhood, the heiress to the famous surname was thrust into the relentless machinery of show business. Her mother orchestrated every career move, every public appearance, and every friendship, weaving a web of dependency that was almost impossible to break. The matriarch insisted on starring alongside her offspring in television shows like the 1960s drama series they led together, effectively ensuring the younger woman could never escape the suffocating shadow cast by the legendary leading lady. The public adored their on-screen chemistry, completely unaware of the strict psychological leash held tightly behind the scenes. When the desperate daughter finally sought refuge in romance in the early 1970s, hoping that marriage would offer a sanctuary away from the maternal spotlight, she found herself trapped in an even deeper nightmare. The famous actress refused to relinquish her grip, constantly inserting herself into the daily lives of the newlyweds. She criticized her son-in-law relentlessly, demanding that her daughter prioritize the family image over her marital vows and personal happiness. Every holiday, every weekend, and every major life decision had to pass through the mother's strict approval process. This relentless emotional manipulation turned the young couple's home into a psychological battlefield. Every argument between the spouses was fueled by the invisible but heavy presence of the domineering matriarch, who played the victim whenever her authority was questioned. The young bride was torn between the desperate need for her husband's love and the paralyzing fear of her mother's wrath, a toxic dynamic that slowly drained the life out of her once promising and hopeful relationship. Guilt was weaponized daily, with the older actress staging dramatic health scares whenever she felt her influence slipping away. Ultimately, the constant interference and emotional blackmail proved too much for the fragile union to survive. The marriage crumbled under the weight of unrealistic expectations and divided loyalties, leaving the daughter isolated and deeply wounded. The celebrated movie star had successfully maintained her absolute dominance over her family circle, but in doing so, she condemned her own child to a prolonged period of profound loneliness and heavy, unresolved emotional hardship. The golden cage remained securely locked, leaving the daughter with a broken heart and a life dictated entirely by a ghost of the cinema. Vanessa Bell. Far removed from the rigid conventions of traditional society, the bohemian circles of London fostered an atmosphere where boundaries were constantly blurred. At the very center of this prestigious intellectual elite stood a renowned painter whose complicated romantic entanglements would eventually sow the seeds of a profound tragedy for her own child. Vanessa Bell cultivated a life of artistic freedom and unconventional domestic arrangements, shielding herself from judgment while leaving her daughter completely vulnerable to the chaotic undercurrents of their household. For nearly 2 decades, the young heiress was raised in a carefully constructed web of beautiful illusions, completely unaware of the fundamental truth regarding her true parentage. The celebrated artist deliberately concealed the identity of the girl's biological father, choosing instead to maintain a polite domestic facade that suited her own complex emotional needs. This monumental deception laid an incredibly fragile psychological foundation for the daughter, who grew up sensing an unspoken, heavy tension in the house, forever chasing a stable sense of belonging. The ultimate maternal betrayal began to unfold when the innocent daughter caught the romantic attention of a charismatic, older writer who had once been deeply entangled in the mother's own inner circle. In a disturbing twist of fate that defied basic moral comprehension, this older man had actually been a former intimate companion of the girl's hidden biological father. Rather than stepping forward to protect her child from such a psychologically damaging union, the matriarch remained chillingly passive, calmly watching the unsettling courtship progress over the years. When the devastating truth about her hidden lineage and her suitor's incredibly complicated past was finally revealed, the young bride found herself trapped in a terrifying psychological labyrinth. The controversial marriage, which haunted her life from the 1940s well through the 1980s, was built entirely upon a decaying foundation of profound manipulation. She tragically realized that her entire existence and her most intimate relationship were merely twisted echoes of her mother's past desires, leaving her feeling alienated and emotionally shattered. Despite witnessing the painful deterioration of her daughter's mental well-being and the inevitable collapse of the controversial marriage, the matriarch maintained an impenetrable wall of cold detachment. She prioritized the preservation of her artistic legacy and the peaceful routine of her bohemian enclave over the desperate cries for help from her own flesh and blood. The famous painter refused to take any personal responsibility for the toxic environment she had engineered, leaving the younger woman to navigate her trauma alone. This dark legacy of silent deceit permanently fractured their maternal bond. The brilliant artist had sculpted a fascinating life for herself, but her ultimate masterpiece was selfishly painted, using the shattered pieces of her own child's personal happiness and future. Frances Shand Kidd. Born into the rigid confines of high aristocracy, the expectations of noble lineage often forge hearts of ice rather than maternal warmth. The woman who gave birth to the most photographed princess of the late 20th century was absolutely no exception to this cruel rule. Abandoning her family estate when her children were still very young, she established a pattern of profound emotional absence that would forever haunt her youngest daughter. The resulting psychological void desperately needed to be filled, pushing the young girl into a monumental royal union that was doomed from the very start. As the spectacular royal wedding of 1981 captured the imagination of the entire globe, the private reality behind the palace gates was remarkably cold. The aristocratic matriarch did not offer a steady hand of support to the overwhelmed young bride. Instead, she frequently assumed the role of a harsh and unforgiving critic. Every misstep, every perceived flaw in etiquette, and every sign of emotional fragility was met with sharp disapproval rather than basic maternal comfort. The young princess, navigating a terrifyingly public existence, found no safe harbor in the woman who should have been her ultimate protector. When the royal marriage inevitably began to fracture under the immense weight of public scrutiny and private betrayal during the late 1980s, the maternal interference took a much darker turn. Rather than keeping family matters discreetly behind closed doors, the older woman occasionally engaged with the merciless press, airing private grievances that only added fuel to the raging media fire. Her unpredictable public statements deeply wounded the vulnerable princess, creating an agonizing sense of betrayal. The daughter realized that even her own flesh and blood could not be fully trusted in the treacherous landscape of royal life. The ultimate collapse of the royal union in the mid-1990s did not bring peace between the two women. As the liberated princess sought genuine affection and embarked on new romantic chapters, the matriarch unleashed her most devastating judgments. She aggressively condemned her daughter's choices in partners, using deeply hurtful language that shattered whatever fragile bond remained between them. This relentless emotional assault during the final years of the beloved icon's life left the younger woman feeling entirely abandoned, stripped of the unconditional love she had craved since early childhood. The tragic and sudden passing of the global icon in 1997 cast a permanent shadow over this fractured relationship. The aristocratic mother was left to navigate the heavy burden of a legacy defined by chronic estrangement and bitter public disputes. By prioritizing her own rigid judgments and social pride over simple emotional support, she had fundamentally failed the daughter who desperately needed an ally against the world. The glamorous fairy tale was ultimately poisoned not just by royal pressures, but by a chilling maternal coldness that refused to offer comfort when the crown became too heavy to bear. Barbara Cartland. Draped in endless layers of pink chiffon and surrounded by an army of lapdogs, the most prolific romance novelist of the 20th century sold millions of books about magical love and happy endings. However, the reality she constructed for her own flesh and blood was a chilling contradiction to her sweet, fictional fairy tales. Behind the theatrical facade of fluffy feathers and glittering jewels operated a matriarch with an iron will, treating her daughter not as a beloved child, but as a carefully calculated investment designed to conquer high society. From her earliest years, the young girl was strictly trained to navigate the ruthless world of the British aristocracy. While her mother typed away, creating passionate heroes and innocent maidens, the daughter was explicitly taught that genuine affection was secondary to acquiring a prestigious title. The author orchestrated her offspring's social debut in the 1940s with the cold, calculating precision of a seasoned military general, ensuring the girl was perfectly positioned to capture a wealthy and aristocratic husband. When the heiress eventually secured prominent unions, marrying a wealthy politician and later a famous earl in the 1970s, the prominent writer did not retreat into the background. Instead, she continuously injected her overwhelming persona into her daughter's marital life. The matriarch demanded that every family event serve as a grand stage for her own publicity. The daughters' homes were frequently invaded by the relentless media circus that followed the flamboyant author, stripping the newly formed families of any normal domestic privacy. This suffocating maternal presence severely strained the daughters' romantic relationships. Husbands found themselves not only married to a fiercely ambitious socialite, but also forced to constantly accommodate an incredibly demanding mother-in-law who simply refused to share the spotlight. The writer would publicly boast about her daughter's elite connections, effectively treating her child's marriage as a personal trophy. Behind closed doors, this relentless pressure to maintain a flawless, high society image bred intense emotional exhaustion and quiet resentment. In her tireless pursuit of absolute social validation, the legendary romance author completely failed to provide the unconditional emotional warmth her own popular books championed. The daughter was molded into a formidable, hardened society figure, surviving multiple complex marriages while forever remaining an extension of her mother's monumental ego. The woman who made a massive fortune writing about true love ultimately proved that in her own reality, family bonds were merely transactional tools used to climb the golden ladder of the British elite. Maureen O'Sullivan. The silver screen was once graced by a delicate Irish-born beauty who captivated audiences with her portrayal of innocent heroines in classic jungle adventures. Yet, behind the gentle cinematic persona of Maureen O'Sullivan lay an iron-willed matriarch, deeply rooted in strict traditional values. When her ethereal, fiercely independent daughter rose to global fame during the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s, a brutal generational clash became entirely inevitable. The celebrated older actress demanded strict adherence to conventional morality, viewing her offspring's bohemian lifestyle as a direct challenge to her own respectability. The most explosive confrontation erupted when the young starlet embarked on a highly publicized romantic relationship with a legendary, much older singer in the mid-1960s. For the conservative matriarch, this sudden union was an absolute disaster that threatened to tarnish the family name. Rather than offering guidance for her daughter in the chaotic whirlwind of media attention, the mother launched a relentless campaign of harsh criticism. She openly voiced her profound disapproval, creating an incredibly hostile environment that effectively forced the young bride to choose between her new husband and her own flesh and blood. As the high-profile marriage inevitably began to crack under the immense pressure of conflicting careers, the vulnerable daughter desperately needed a comforting maternal shoulder. Instead, she was met with cold vindication and a devastating lack of basic emotional support. The older actress viewed the marital struggles as proof of her own righteous judgment, using the fragile situation to further impose her controlling nature. Every tear shed by the exhausted young wife was met with a harsh reminder of her mother's initial warnings, turning the mother from a protector into a feared adversary. Hoping to find stability after a painful separation, the daughter eventually entered into a second marriage in the early 1970s with a brilliant classical composer. However, the shadow of maternal judgment continued to loom heavily over the new household. The demanding matriarch found new reasons to criticize her daughter's domestic choices, heavily interfering in how the family was managed. The older woman's constant, unsolicited advice and sharp remarks created an agonizing undercurrent of tension that slowly poisoned the atmosphere of the once happy home. To survive the relentless emotional battering, the famous daughter was ultimately forced to construct massive emotional walls against her mother. The older actress, blinded by her stubborn need to be right, failed to recognize that her unyielding strictness was destroying their relationship. By prioritizing her own rigid expectations over unconditional love, she actively undermined her daughter's attempts to build a secure family. The woman who played nurturing roles on camera ultimately proved to be a deeply destructive force in her own child's search for domestic peace. Enid Blyton. Millions of children adored her books, believing she was a fairy godmother of literature who understood their deepest dreams. Yet, the woman who penned countless tales of idyllic childhoods harbored a terrifying emotional emptiness toward her own offspring. Behind the heavily locked doors of her seemingly perfect countryside estate, the celebrated author functioned not as a nurturing parent, but as a rigid executive managing an inconvenient biological project. Her typewriters never stopped clattering, producing endless adventures, while her real daughters starved for basic maternal affection in the cold rooms upstairs. When the writer's first marriage dissolved in the early 1940s, she ruthlessly banished her daughter's beloved father from their daily existence without a single tear. She instantly replaced him with a new husband, demanding that the young girls immediately forget their past and enthusiastically accept the new, heavily curated family dynamic. Any display of natural grief or confusion was met with chilling silence, forced isolation, or swift emotional punishment. The terrified children were compelled to bury their true emotions deep inside a heavy fortress of forced politeness and silent obedience. This absolute denial of emotional reality created a profoundly distorted foundation for the younger woman's future adult life. Raised in a sterile environment where affection was strictly conditional and genuine feelings were entirely prohibited, the daughter struggled immensely to understand the basic mechanics of healthy human connection. The famous mother actively discouraged any deep emotional bonds, viewing independent thought or rebellious feelings as a direct threat to her perfectly curated, highly profitable domestic narrative. The public saw a smiling matriarch, but the daughter knew only a cold dictator. As the traumatized daughter entered adulthood, and attempted to forge her own romantic relationships in the 1960s and 1970s, she found herself woefully unequipped for the delicate complexities of marriage. The immense psychological scars inflicted by the beloved children's author manifested as severe insecurity, paralyzing self-doubt, and deep emotional detachment. The daughter was constantly waiting for the inevitable rejection, inadvertently damaging her own marital happiness because she had never been taught the fundamental concepts of emotional safety, forgiveness, or unconditional trust. The global literary icon successfully maintained her sparkling, flawless public image until her final days, forever celebrated worldwide as a gentle beacon of childhood joy. However, the true legacy she bequeathed to her own flesh and blood was a devastating lifetime of psychological struggle and tragically fractured romantic relationships. The wealthy woman who brought boundless, colorful imagination to the world ultimately left her own daughter trapped in a bleak, loveless reality, proving that the most enchanting fairy tales often serve as heavy curtains, hiding the darkest, unspoken domestic truths. Adrienne Allen. The dazzling lights of the West End stage illuminated many brilliant careers, but they also cast long, bitter shadows over family life. For a celebrated theatrical leading lady of the mid-20th century, the applause of the crowd was an intoxicating drug she refused to share, even with her own flesh and blood. When her talented daughter began to show a natural aptitude for the dramatic arts, the older actress did not offer maternal encouragement. Instead, she viewed the rising star strictly as a fierce and youthful competitor. This unnatural rivalry deeply infected the atmosphere of their elegant London home throughout the 1950s and beyond. The demanding matriarch constantly belittled her offspring's achievements, dismissing her early successes as mere strokes of luck rather than genuine skill. Every time the young woman secured a promising role or received a glowing review, the mother would immediately highlight a perceived flaw, ensuring that her daughter never felt truly accomplished or secure in her own professional identity. The psychological toll of this relentless maternal competition proved absolutely devastating when the young actress attempted to build a personal life. Seeking validation and the unconditional love she was entirely denied at home, she rushed into a high-profile marriage with a charismatic fellow actor before the end of the 1950s. However, the deep-seated insecurities planted by her mother had already taken root. The young bride was constantly plagued by severe self-doubt, entirely unable to believe she was worthy of lasting affection. Rather than supporting her child through the inevitable challenges of early matrimony, the prominent stage veteran observed the marital struggles with a chilling sense of detached superiority. She offered no emotional sanctuary when the young couple faced profound difficulties, subtly implying that the daughter's inability to maintain the union was simply another personal failure. The toxic combination of an unsupportive mother and immense inner turmoil ultimately accelerated the painful collapse of the highly publicized marriage. The permanent emotional damage inflicted by this hidden familial warfare extended far beyond a single divorce. The acclaimed younger actress spent decades battling the heavy ghosts of maternal rejection, struggling to forge healthy connections while desperately seeking the approval she would never receive. The glamorous theater icon successfully protected her own legendary spotlight, but her ruthless competitive spirit fundamentally destroyed her daughter's fragile chance at experiencing a normal, peaceful, and enduring domestic happiness. Thora Hird. A beloved fixture of British television, known to millions for her warm and humorous grandmotherly characters, presented a drastically different face behind the closed doors of her private family home. The celebrated Northern actress ruled her household with an iron grip, demanding absolute perfection and unwavering obedience from her only child. From a very tender age, the daughter was aggressively pushed into the limelight, heavily burdened by the enormous expectations of a mother who saw the young girl as a direct reflection of her own strict, unyielding moral values. While other children enjoyed the carefree days of innocent youth during the late 1940s and 1950s, the young girl was strictly molded into a perfectly polished child star. The formidable matriarch managed every single intricate aspect of her budding career, relentlessly dictating her public appearances, her carefully tailored wardrobe, and her meticulously selected social interactions. This overwhelming level of maternal control left the younger actress with virtually no breathing room to develop her own independent personality away from the cameras. When the exhausted young star finally sought true independence and a safe haven through a high-profile marriage to a famous American singer in the middle of the 1960s, the overbearing matriarch simply refused to loosen her suffocating hold. Despite the immense physical distance between the continents, the older woman constantly projected her severe judgments across the ocean. She frequently criticized the newly formed household, heavily implying that her daughter was completely failing to uphold the exceptionally high standards of domestic perfection she had been taught. This unrelenting transatlantic pressure created an agonizing, highly toxic dynamic within the supposedly happy new marriage. The American husband found himself contending not only with the typical challenges of a high-profile celebrity union, but also with an invisible, overpowering mother-in-law, whose harsh, authoritative voice seemed to constantly echo in their daily lives. The deeply anxious young wife, desperately trying to please both her exceptionally demanding mother and her increasingly frustrated new partner, found herself trapped in an impossible emotional struggle. Ultimately, the crushing burden of these immense external pressures contributed heavily to the extremely painful dissolution of the union before the end of the 1970s. Instead of offering a gentle, comforting embrace to her heartbroken child, the strict matriarch viewed the severe romantic collapse as a profound personal embarrassment that threatened to tarnish the spotless family reputation. The deeply loved national treasure had successfully maintained her own unblemished, wholesome public facade for decades. But her unyielding authoritarianism broke her daughter's heart. Judy Garland. The mesmerizing voice that sang about a magical land belonged to a woman whose own reality was frequently a nightmare. Seeking refuge from the American press, the iconic Hollywood legend relocated to London during the 1960s, hoping for a grand professional revival. However, she brought her heavy personal demons across the ocean, dragging her exceptionally talented teenage daughter directly into the center of a chaotic and profoundly unstable domestic vortex. Rather than providing a secure environment, the celebrated singer completely reversed the fundamental roles of parent and child. The exhausted young girl became the primary caretaker for her incredibly fragile mother, managing severe emotional collapses and frequent medical crises. Night after night, the frightened teenager coaxed the legendary performer out of deep despair, sacrificing her youth to keep the glittering maternal facade intact. This dynamic normalized a terrifying level of anxiety. This massive psychological burden fundamentally distorted the younger woman's understanding of human connection. Because her formative years were consumed by the desperate need to rescue an erratic parent, she subconsciously learned that affection must always be tied to extreme turbulence. The mother, consumed by her own desperate struggles, actively encouraged this profound codependency, viewing her daughter not as an independent person, but as an absolutely essential emotional anchor. When the traumatized daughter blossomed into a global superstar and attempted to build her romantic life in the late 1960s and 1970s, the heavy maternal shadow followed her. She repeatedly found herself drawn to highly complicated, dramatically turbulent relationships that mirrored the exhausting chaos of her childhood. The basic concept of a peaceful domestic union felt entirely alien to a woman whose emotional foundation was built on surviving constant familial emergencies. Throughout her multiple high-profile marriages, the acclaimed younger performer struggled immensely to break the destructive patterns inherited from her legendary mother. Whenever marital peace was briefly achieved, she often felt an overwhelming sense of unease, unconsciously sabotaging the stability because it lacked the dramatic intensity she associated with devotion. The husbands who tried to offer genuine tranquility found themselves competing with the deeply ingrained psychological blueprint. The premature and deeply tragic passing of the beloved singer in London just before the end of the 1960s left a permanent, unhealed wound. The mother left behind a monumental musical legacy that the world continues to worship, but her final gift to her devoted daughter was a lifetime of intense emotional struggle. The young woman spent decades navigating the painful wreckage of her own marriages, forever haunted by the reality that the woman who gave her a voice robbed her of ordinary love. Vivien Leigh. The most exquisite beauty of the British stage and screen possessed a fragile brilliance that masked a deeply turbulent inner world. While audiences lost themselves in her cinematic romances during the 1930s and 1940s, her daughter experienced profound emotional abandonment. The iconic actress, entirely consumed by her own meteoric rise to global fame and a passionate second marriage to a legendary director, left her young child in the care of others, creating an insurmountable wall of cold detachment. Whenever the young girl was briefly permitted to enter her mother's glamorous orbit, she was met not with maternal warmth, but with terrifying unpredictability. The celebrated star suffered from severe emotional crises that dramatically altered the atmosphere of their luxurious home. The daughter learned to walk on eggshells, constantly navigating sudden shifts between dazzling charm and devastating moods. This chaotic environment deeply ingrained a profound sense of anxiety, teaching the young woman that love was intrinsically tied to immense volatility. Desperate to escape the suffocating shadow of her legendary mother, the young woman sought a completely different path. In the late 1950s, she entered into a quiet marriage, praying that a conventional life would provide the stable sanctuary she had never known. However, the profound psychological wounds inflicted by years of maternal neglect were incredibly difficult to heal. The famous actress completely failed to offer any guidance for a peaceful domestic existence, simply because she had never experienced one herself. Even from a distance, the overwhelming legacy of the cinematic icon cast a heavy shadow over her daughter's fragile new reality. The constant public fascination with the mother's dramatic private life and frequent theatrical breakdowns heavily infiltrated the younger woman's desperate attempts at achieving normalcy. Instead of being allowed to build an independent identity, the daughter was forever tied to the exhausting public narrative of a flawed goddess. The matriarch remained absorbed in her own theatrical tragedies. The ultimate tragedy of this fractured relationship was cemented long before the legendary actress passed away in the late 1960s. The daughter miraculously managed to build a resilient life, but only by fighting against the immense emotional damage she inherited from a mother who preferred the adoration of millions. The woman who immortalized the ultimate Southern belle on screen proved that the pursuit of legendary status often requires sacrificing the innocent hearts left waiting behind the heavy velvet curtains.